It was the way my daughter said, "We've already had it," that broke something in me. Not the words themselves, but how casually she dropped them, like a grocery list item she'd forgotten to mention. I had asked what time the engagement dinner was. That was all. Just a simple question. And Zoe, my only daughter, my only girl, glanced up from her phone with a shrug and said, "Oh, we had it yesterday." Yesterday. I stood there in the hallway, still holding the envelope I'd bought weeks ago to tuck a small check inside. My best blouse pressed and hanging behind the door. I'd even dug out Donald's old cufflinks, the silver ones he wore at our anniversary dinner, to pin to a soft wrap I'd planned to wear. He would have wanted me to look my best. But they'd had it yesterday. The laughter, the toasts, the photographs that will live forever on someone's social media page. And I wasn't there. Not because I forgot. Not because I was late or difficult or sick. But because they never told me. So I did what I've learned to do over the past few years when faced with these new, sharpened versions of my children. I smiled, nodded like it didn't matter, and walked back into my kitchen. I sat down at the table where I'd once taught Zoe to cut paper snowflakes, and I placed the envelope beside my cold tea. I didn't cry. Not then. But I did start to plan. Not revenge. Not exactly. Just a quiet rebalancing of scales that had tilted too far for too long. The morning after the engagement dinner I hadn't attended, I woke up before dawn, the sky still that pale, lidless gray that used to mean something when Donald was alive. He'd rise early to tend to the garden before work, humming while he watered the roses, the sleeves of his pajama shirt rolled to his elbows. I could hear him now, or imagined I could, some ghost of rhythm from the days when mornings were built on love and habit, not avoidance. I made tea, not coffee. I couldn't bear the smell of it anymore, not since Zoe's husband-to-be had once joked, loudly, that my burnt drip sludge was a biohazard. Everyone laughed. Even Zoe, though she caught my eye and gave a small shrug, like it wasn't worth making a thing out of. There had been a time she would have said something. "Don't talk to my mother like that," or even a quiet, "That's not funny." Now it was all about smoothing the path forward, making herself palatable to her in-laws, her fiancé, her version of what grown-up daughters are supposed to be. The truth is, I hadn't much liked her fiancé. Carter. Polished, impatient, always checking his phone like it owed him something. His compliments were always a beat too late, his apologies never quite apologies. And Zoe shifted around him, trying to catch his light, like a sunflower turned toward a bulb. I told myself it was just nerves, that she'd settle in her own skin once the wedding was over. But there were signs. Slights. Glances. Little things no one else seemed to notice. Like how he always called her Zoe, even though she hated that growing up. Like how he steered every conversation back to himself, even the ones about the wedding. And how Zoe let him. Laughed when he dismissed her, like it didn't hurt. After my tea, I stood in front of the hall closet for a long while, staring at the garment bag with the dress I'd planned to wear. Pale blue silk with a soft waist, flattering, modest, something that had felt right when I bought it. I'd even found a hat. It still had the tag dangling from the brim. I opened the bag, laid the dress out on my bed. Sat beside it, smoothing the fabric with my palm. It was beautiful. Not dramatic, not loud, just beautiful in a way I had hoped Zoe would understand. But I realized now, with something tight rising in my throat, that she probably never would. Not anymore. Later that afternoon, I drove to the florist. The woman behind the counter recognized me. I'd ordered arrangements there for years, Donald's funeral, the church, Zoe's graduation, even my neighbor's hip surgery. She smiled, asked if I was here to confirm the wedding flowers. My heart did something ugly in my chest. "No," I said, carefully. "I just need a bouquet. For a special occasion." I looked around the shop, vases gleaming in the window, lilies opening like slow, careful yawn, and said, no. Nothing special. I chose daffodils. Not because they meant anything, but because they looked defiant in the vase, standing upright despite the cold outside. That night, I left the flowers on Zoe's porch. No note. Just the blooms in a plain glass jar, placed neatly beside the doormat. A gesture. A reminder. A silence returned. I didn't hear from her the next day. Not the next week either. She posted engagement photos, soft-lit, filtered, perfect. My face wasn't among the likes. I watched her life unfold in curated fragments, and not one of them included me. Jerry called, though. My son. Not out of concern. He needed a favor. Mom, he said, breezily. You're not still upset about that dinner thing, are you? I said nothing. It wasn't personal. It was just a timing thing. Carter's family was in town for like 3 days and, well, you know how tight everything is right now. Tight. As if I were an excess thread they didn't know what to do with. What do you need, Jerry? I asked. A pause. Then the familiar shuffle. I was hoping you could float me a little until Friday. Rebecca's car broke down, and I'm covering rent this month. Just a few hundred. I'll pay you back. Rebecca. The 26-year-old yoga instructor he'd been dating for nearly a year now. She left her essential oils and workout gear all over my house whenever they visited, which was more often than not. They'd stopped asking, just arrived, settled in, took up space. I said, no. The silence that followed was short, sharp. Come on, Mom. It's not like you're strapped. You don't even travel. What are you saving for? I didn't respond. You know what? Never mind, he muttered. Forget I asked. And just like that, the call ended. It wasn't the first time Jerry had borrowed without returning. I used to justify it. He was going through something. He was trying. He just needed support. But this time, something felt different. Less about the money, more about the way my name had become synonymous with available. Less a person, more a line item on someone else's budget. A week later, an invitation arrived in the mail. Not from Zoe. From Carter's mother. Ivory cardstock, silver lettering. You are cordially invited to celebrate the upcoming marriage of Zoe Lynn Thompson and Carter James Merrill. Bridal brunch at the Glenmore Country Club. RSVP by end of month. No mention of family. No, beloved mother of the bride. Just a name in a guest list. I stood at the counter reading it, then slowly fed the envelope and card into the shredder Donald had insisted on buying years ago. He always believed in paper trails. I believed in the quiet strength of disappearing completely. That night, I opened a bottle of wine from the cellar. One of the good ones. The kind I used to save for special occasions. I poured myself a glass, pulled out my notebook, the one I kept for grocery lists and doctor's notes, and wrote a different kind of list. Names. Dates. Accounts. A kind of inventory. Because the truth is, I wasn't helpless. Not financially. Not emotionally. I had learned over the years to keep things tucked away, documents, savings, a rainy day fund. I just hadn't realized until now how hard the storm would hit. The list grew. My lawyer. My accountant. The woman who once helped Donald and me revise our wills after his heart scare. I'd call them all. Not out of revenge. Not yet. But because it was time to know exactly where I stood. When I was done, I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark with the wine glass cooling in my hand. I thought about the dress upstairs, the pale blue silk that would never be worn. I thought about the photo albums, the birthdays and dance recitals, the nights spent folding laundry while my children slept. All the ways I'd been there. All the ways I'd given. And now they wanted me present only in the ways that were useful. I set down the glass, stood, and walked to the front door. I didn't open it. Just stood there, palm resting on the wood, feeling the house around me. It was quiet, but not empty. It was mine. Still mine. The lawyer's office smelled like polished wood and forgotten holidays. A little too much cinnamon in the air, as if someone had tried to mask something sour with sweetness. I sat across from Denise Morrow, a woman in her early 60s with short gray hair and the kind of calm that only comes from years of seeing families fight over everything they once called love. She remembered me right away. "You and your husband came in 5 years ago," she said, scanning my file. "It was after his heart scare." "Yes," I replied, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "We never finalized the changes." Denise looked up, her expression softening. "We can do that now." I nodded. We went through everything. The house. The accounts. The small pension from my years teaching part-time after the kids left for college. Donald had been careful, but not controlling. He trusted me, and more importantly, he wanted me to have peace. What we hadn't anticipated was how little our children would value that peace once he was gone. "Do you want them included in the new documents?" Denise asked. I hesitated. "I want them acknowledged," I said. "But not entrusted." She gave a slow nod, one that said she'd heard that before, too many times, probably. We worked for an hour. I added a medical power of attorney, assigned to no one in the family. A friend of mine from church, Elaine, a widow herself, had agreed months ago to step in if anything ever happened to me. "I've seen what happens when people think they're owed your decisions," she'd said over coffee. "Choose someone who won't be waiting for your decline." I left the office with a thick folder, a USB drive, and a small knot in my stomach. It wasn't guilt. It was more like the ache that follows a long stretch in the cold, when your fingers begin to feel again. A kind of painful clarity. At home, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and sorted through the folder again. The will now left the house to me and me alone, with instructions for its sale or transfer to go through Denise's office, not my children. The accounts were secured. I'd opened a second one just 2 months ago, quietly moving what was left of Donald's life insurance there, away from prying eyes and assumptions. The trust Donald had left for the grandchildren was untouched, but separate. If they wanted to access it, they could go through the administrator. Not me. I thought about Zoe's voicemail from the night before. A tight, bright chirp. "Hey, Mom, sorry if you're feeling weird about the brunch thing. Carter's mom just kind of ran with it, you know? Anyway, hope you're good. Love you." Not a question. Not an apology. Just a glossing over, a primer coat of cheerful dismissal. I didn't call back. The next day, I got a text from Jerry. "Mom, can we talk? In person?" I hesitated. Then typed, "Tomorrow. Noon." He showed up 5 minutes late, wearing the leather jacket I bought him for his 29th birthday. Still smelled like the cologne he used to borrow from Donald's dresser. He looked tired, but not in a way that made me sympathetic. More like the weariness of someone who'd finally realized his shortcuts were catching up to him. He sat at the table like it was still his, like he still lived here, like the walls hadn't absorbed years of my solitude since he moved out the second time. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "About the other week. The money thing. I was out of line." I nodded. Things are tight. And you've always helped." "Yes," I said. He fidgeted, picked at the fraying cuff of his jeans. "Rebecca's pregnant." I blinked. He watched me closely. We found out last week. We're keeping it. And, I don't know, I guess I thought maybe you'd want to be part of that. There it was. The new carrot. The new leverage. Grandmotherhood, dangled like a prize for compliance. Congratulations, I said. I hope you're prepared. He shifted, clearly unsure what reaction he'd been expecting. I mean, we'll need help. I imagine you will, I said. But I'm not the help. His mouth dropped open. You're the grandmother. And not the unpaid nanny, the open wallet, or the fallback housing plan. I'm sorry, Jerry, but I've played that part. It's someone else's turn now. He looked wounded. The kind of wounded that came not from pain, but from unmet expectation. I thought you'd be happy. I am. For you. But your happiness isn't my responsibility anymore. He didn't argue. Just stood, hands shoved deep in his pockets. She's due in November, he said, like that might change my mind. I nodded once. Then you have time to grow up. After he left, I made another list. This one was shorter. Realtor, call for valuation. Travel documents, renew passport. Elaine, confirm arrangements. The final item sat at the bottom of the page, in slightly shakier handwriting. Spain. It wasn't a fantasy anymore. Just a word. A destination. Donald had always talked about it, half serious, when we were still paying off student loans and grocery bills with coins from the couch. He'd cut out magazine pictures, terraces draped with bougainvillea, narrow streets glowing in twilight. We'll go one day, he'd say, rubbing my shoulders while I paid bills. When the kids are grown. When it's just us. He'd meant it. And he'd saved, quietly. A small account he'd named the Olive Fund. I found it a month after he died, buried beneath a stack of old insurance statements. $37,000. Enough for a long stay. Enough to start fresh if I wanted to. For a while, I hadn't known what to do with it. Now I did. That weekend, I emailed a property manager in Valencia who catered to American retirees. A week later, I had listings, a rental application, and a welcome packet in my inbox. 2-bedroom flats with tiled kitchens and balconies that caught the afternoon light. It was like looking at someone else's life. Someone braver. On Sunday, I went to church. I wore the pale blue dress I'd planned to wear to Zoe's engagement dinner. No one noticed, not really. But I did. I felt it swish against my legs when I knelt. I felt the fabric hold its shape when I stood, when I walked to the altar for communion. I was dressed for a celebration that never happened, and somehow that made it sacred again. After the service, Elaine squeezed my hand. You look radiant, she said. Did something happen? Yes, I said. I think I'm happening. That afternoon, I sent one final message to Zoe. Not angry. Not cruel. Just clear. Dear Zoe. I hope your brunch was lovely. I won't be attending the bridal shower, and I'll be declining the wedding invitation when it arrives. This isn't out of malice. It's simply the result of realizing that my presence has become optional, something to be slotted in when convenient. I raised you to understand value. I hope you learn to apply it to people, not just things. With love. Mom. I turned off my phone for the rest of the day. Sat in the garden Donald had planted with aching knees and good intentions. The roses needed pruning. The mint had spread into the lavender bed. It would take hours to clean. I didn't rush. Because this wasn't an ending. It was preparation. The letter to Zoe sat unread for 3 days. I could see the message status, delivered, but not opened. Whether that was intentional or not, I couldn't say. But the silence that followed felt purposeful. Measured. As if she'd seen it, and chosen not to respond, not yet. Jerry texted twice more that week. First, Mom, are you really not coming to the wedding? Then, Zoe says you're being dramatic again. Again. As if measured boundaries were performance. As if saying no was a costume I'd thrown on just to make a scene. I didn't respond. I spent that week sorting through drawers. Not because I was moving yet, not officially, but because it felt good to know what I was keeping and what I was leaving behind. Most of what I found had belonged to someone else anyway: Zoe's dance trophies, Jerry's college notebooks, old electronics Donald had sworn he'd repair one day. None of it sparked anything in me anymore. It just weighed down the shelves. I packed what mattered, some family photos, but not all. The wedding portrait from 1979 where Donald still looked bashful in his suit. A few letters from my sister back in Michigan, before the dementia started taking her away piece by piece. A stack of recipe cards, soft at the edges, my mother's handwriting in blue ink still steady, still sure. The rest I donated, sold, or boxed for charity. I didn't ask the kids if they wanted any of it. They hadn't asked after it in years. Midweek, I received a phone call from someone I hadn't heard from in a long time. It was Lisa Edwards, a woman I'd once worked with on the PTA board back when Jerry and Zoe were still in grade school. She was the kind of woman who never lost track of anyone, who sent Christmas cards with neatly typed letters and reached out when someone's name crossed her mind. "Sandra," she said, warmth in her voice, "I heard about the Spain thing." I blinked. "I haven't told anyone yet." "Oh, well, Zoe mentioned it at the bridal shower. Said you were abandoning the family to live abroad." I figured that wasn't quite the whole story. I laughed, despite the tightness in my chest. It's not abandonment if they never showed up to begin with. Lisa didn't argue. "Well, if you need help getting things in order, I know a woman who arranges long-term international moves for retirees. She helped my cousin settle in Portugal. Very discreet. Very competent." I wrote down the number. Before she hung up, Lisa paused. "I don't know what happened, Sandra. But I do know you were the one who organized every bake sale, every teacher gift, every graduation party. You were always there. It's okay if you want to be somewhere else now." That night, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching the late summer dusk settle over the yard. Crickets. Distant sprinklers. A neighbor's wind chime somewhere to the left. Everything familiar, but slightly faded. The place I'd built a life in, painted and re-roofed and gardened through seasons of children and grief and quiet, but it wasn't my future anymore. Not in the way I'd once imagined. The next morning, Zoe finally responded to my message. "Mom. I got your note. I don't even know what to say. This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life, and now you're making it about you. If you didn't want to come, you could have just said so. You didn't have to send that." There was no follow-up. No apology. No question about why I'd written it. Just a gentle shove of guilt, designed to shift the blame back to me. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I booked a flight. 6 weeks from now. One way. The woman Lisa recommended, and Mitchell, was every bit as competent as promised. Efficient without being brusque, she walked me through the steps of international residence, property leasing, healthcare enrollment. She even helped me sort the best options for storing what little I planned to keep in the States. She didn't ask why I was going alone. The only person I told in person was Elaine. We met at our usual cafe, the one near the park with uneven pavement and a row of planters always slightly too full of begonias. "You're really doing it," she said softly, reading the ticket confirmation over her coffee. "I didn't think you'd actually leave." "I didn't either," I admitted. She was quiet for a moment. "Are you scared?" "Yes," I said. But not as scared as I am of staying here and continuing to be invisible. Elaine reached across the table, placed her hand over mine. They'll say you ran away. I know. They'll say you're punishing them. I know that too. But you're not. No, I said. I'm finally choosing myself. That's different. That Sunday, Jerry came by the house. He didn't knock. Just walked in with that same old habit, the one that said this was still his home base, still his backup plan. I heard from Zoe, he said. You're moving to Spain. I nodded. He let out a low whistle. Jesus, Mom. What is this? Some kind of late-life crisis? No, I said. It's a late-life awakening. He didn't laugh. Just leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. What about the house? The neighborhood? Your friends? Us? What about me, Jerry? I asked. What about what I want? He looked genuinely confused. I thought this place meant everything to you. It did, I said. And now it means closure. He shook his head. You can't just disappear. I'm not disappearing. I'm relocating. That's what people do when the place they're in no longer fits. You're being selfish. I was selfless for 40 years, I said calmly. I think I've earned 7 time zones between us. He blinked. What about the wedding? I wish your sister well, I said. But I won't be there. He stood up straighter. She's hurt, you know. You really cut her with that message. I nodded. Good. Maybe the wound will make her think. He stared at me for a long moment, then softened. Rebecca's worried you won't want anything to do with the baby. I tilted my head. I want everything to do with the baby. But I won't be a tool for guilt. If you want me involved, I'll be there in the ways that work for both of us. If not, I'll still sleep just fine. He looked like he wanted to argue. Then didn't. I don't know who you are anymore, he said. And I smiled. That's because you stopped paying attention. After he left, I sat on the couch for a long time, staring at nothing. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. There was no triumph, no grand sense of power. Just peace. Just stillness. The next 2 weeks passed quickly. I sold the car. Arranged storage. Closed accounts I no longer needed. I walked through the house slowly, room by room, saying goodbye to each space like it had spoken to me once and now was fading into silence. I didn't tell Zoe I was leaving. I didn't give Jerry my address. Elaine had it, and that was enough. On my last morning in the house, I placed one envelope on the hall table, sealed, addressed to both of them, marked open only if necessary. Inside was the lawyer's number, account contacts, instructions for what to do with my remains if something happened. It wasn't bitterness. It was preparedness. I rolled my suitcase down the front steps alone. The taxi was waiting. The driver, a kind older man with kind eyes, loaded my bags without a word. As we pulled away, I didn't look back. Because sometimes, the truest way to reclaim your life is not to burn the bridge behind you, but to simply stop walking back across it. Spain didn't welcome me with fanfare. No warm violin music or poetic sunsets. Just the low clatter of wheels over stone and a salty breeze that tugged at the corners of my coat. The taxi dropped me at the edge of a narrow street in Valencia, the kind that wasn't built for cars, where laundry lines stretched across balconies and every doorway had a pot of something green growing toward the light. The apartment was smaller than the house, but it fit. White stucco walls, blue-tiled floors, windows that opened onto a view of terracotta rooftops and, in the distance, the thin shimmer of sea. There was a kitchen no bigger than a walk-in closet, a bedroom with a modest iron bed, and a little terrace just wide enough for one chair and a folding table. I unpacked slowly. One suitcase for clothes, one for books and keepsakes. I set Donald's photo on the windowsill, his favorite one, taken when we were still young, both of us squinting into the sun at a beach in Florida, our skin brown from the day. He looked at ease there, in the quiet brightness. I think he would have liked it here. The first week was a blur of logistics. Meeting the landlord's cousin who managed the place. Setting up a phone account. Learning where the groceries were, and which little markets sold fresh bread at 6 each morning. I stumbled through the language with my schoolgirl Spanish, polite and clumsy and earnest. And every day, I walked. Not for exercise, but for proof. Proof that I was still moving forward. That my body still obeyed me. That I could make a life somewhere new. The people here didn't stare. Older women walked alone without comment. I was just another widow with a tote bag full of oranges and a head full of thoughts. On my second Sunday, I found a little cafe 2 blocks from the cathedral. A place with no menu in English and old wooden chairs that creaked when you sat. I ordered coffee, real coffee, rich and dark, and sat for an hour without checking my phone. There was a young couple at the next table, arguing gently about something that seemed trivial. A man feeding scraps to a skinny cat. An old woman across the square hanging linens with an elegance that made the chore look ceremonial. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel triumphant either. Just still. I rented a small desk space in a co-working studio the following week. Not because I had work to do, but because I wanted a place to go that wasn't my apartment. The receptionist, a young woman named Marta, welcomed me like I was someone who still had things to say. "You write?" she asked, gesturing to the empty notebooks I carried. "I might," I said. "I'm still finding the words." By the end of the month, I had a rhythm. Mornings on the terrace with tea. A walk to the market. Hours at the desk, reading or scribbling half-thoughts in a notebook. I started journaling again. Then one day, I wrote a full paragraph about the night Zoe was born, and how small she looked under the hospital lights, wrapped like a parcel I wasn't sure how to open. Then came a memory of Jerry at 3, banging pots on the floor while I made meatloaf, shouting with glee like it was music. I wrote that too. Page by page, they came back to me, not just the wounds, but the moments before. The sweetness that made the betrayal possible. I didn't write to publish. I wrote to remember. To reclaim. One morning, I received a letter. Not a text or email. A real letter, postmarked from Michigan. The handwriting was unfamiliar, sharp and formal. Inside was a photograph. A baby. Small, dark-haired, held in Rebecca's arms. Jerry beside her, looking tired and proud. Below the photo, in shaky script, her name is Eliana. She arrived early, but she's strong. We thought you should know. No invitation. No return address. Just the offering. I sat with it a long time. I placed the photo on the small shelf above my desk, next to the picture of Donald. I whispered the baby's name once. Eliana. A name that meant, God has answered. Later that week, I mailed a package back. A handmade blanket. Pale yellow, soft cotton, woven in a little artisan shop down the road. No note. Just the warmth of it, folded and wrapped with twine. I didn't expect a reply. That wasn't the point. Some doors don't need to be closed. Just locked from one side. By my 3rd month in Spain, I knew the rhythms of the neighborhood. I knew which vendor gave me an extra tomato just because I spoke kindly. I knew how the church bells sounded at noon, and which neighbors argued through their windows, and which ones danced on their balconies when they thought no one was watching. The ache in my chest didn't vanish. It just quieted. Became manageable. Became mine. And one morning, while watching gulls circle the sea, I realized something simple and devastating. They had loved the version of me that didn't need anything. As long as I gave, they stayed. As soon as I reached for something of my own, they withdrew. I'd raised children who were capable. Who were smart. Who could build a life. But I hadn't taught them to stay when love became inconvenient. That was my fault. But this quiet life, this return to myself, was my correction. Elaine emailed me once a week. Her messages were full of updates about mutual friends, book recommendations, and encouragement. She signed off every time with, "Still cheering for you. E." And one day, 6 months after I'd left, I received an email from Zoe. Subject line, "I don't know where to start." Her message was short. "Mom. I'm sorry. I don't even know what I was thinking. I didn't mean to make you feel excluded. I didn't know how to balance everything. And then when you said you weren't coming, it felt like a punishment. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just the only way you had left to be heard. I miss you. Carter says hello. He's trying to be better. We both are. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Zoe." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry. But because some wounds deserve more than words. I gave it time. 4 weeks later, I sent a postcard. A photo of my little street, with blooming geraniums and a blue sky. On the back, I wrote, "Still here. Still healing. The door is cracked. But it won't swing wide again without work. Love. Mom." There was no flourish, no final lesson to tie it all together. Just this. A woman in her 60s, living in a sunlit apartment by the sea. Drinking tea. Writing quietly. Remembering who she is. Not a storybook ending. But a true one. One I chose for myself. And that made all the difference. The postcard must have opened something. 2 months passed without word. Then, in the still heat of a July afternoon, I received a package. It arrived unannounced, the corners slightly bruised from its journey. The return address wasn't Zoe's, but a forwarding service in Connecticut. Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue, was a photo album. Not one I recognized. It was hand-bound, covered in linen. No title, no inscription. Just a black ribbon knotted loosely around its middle. I sat down at the small table by the terrace, the cicadas droning from the alley below, and untied the ribbon. The first page was blank. The second held a photograph I hadn't seen in years, Zoe, maybe 6 or 7, covered in flour, standing on a stool beside me at the old kitchen counter. My hand was on her back, steadying her as she stirred. We both looked young, absorbed. No one posing. Just caught mid-motion by Donald's lens. The next page, a note, handwritten in Zoe's blocky cursive. "I found these going through the attic boxes. I thought you might want them back. Or maybe I just needed to look at them myself. I don't know." There were 20 photographs in total. Some I'd taken. Some Donald. Some I couldn't remember being captured at all. One of Jerry asleep on my chest at 2 weeks old, my eyes closed, my body still swollen from birth. One of Zoe in her prom dress, laughing at something just out of frame. One of all 4 of us, awkward and smiling, at some roadside ice cream stand on a summer trip to Vermont. The last image was of Donald and me in the garden, long before the gray had settled into his beard. He was holding a trowel. I was holding a sprig of rosemary. We were both laughing. Really laughing. The kind of laugh that doesn't happen in front of others. The kind of laugh that says this is home. I closed the book gently, laid it on the table, and watched the breeze lift the edge of the tissue paper. It would have been easy to cry. Instead, I made a cup of coffee, strong and dark, and sat with the feeling. The feeling of being remembered not just for how I'd disappointed them, but for how I'd held them. The next morning, I drafted a letter. A real one. Written by hand, folded carefully. Zoe. Thank you for the photos. I had forgotten how full our life once was. Not perfect, but full. I'm not angry anymore. Or maybe I am, but not in the way I used to be. I've learned that anger is just grief that hasn't found its shape yet. And I've grieved a great deal. You say you miss me. That's a start. But missing someone is not the same as knowing them. I'd like to know you again, if you're willing. But we have to begin as who we are now, not who we were. You'll need to ask questions. And I will too. It will be uncomfortable. But if we can be honest, truly honest, then perhaps there's a path forward. With love. Mom. I mailed it the next day. 3 weeks later, an email came. Longer than before. Meandering, unsure. Zoe didn't make excuses. She didn't beg for absolution. She just told me things. About how hard the wedding planning had been. About how Carter's family had expectations that suffocated her. How she'd sometimes felt like a doll being moved between scenes, smiling on cue. She told me she hadn't meant to exclude me. But that she had avoided me. That my presence brought up her own shame, and instead of facing it, she'd rewritten the script to make me the villain. It was raw and awkward and full of half-finished thoughts. But it was honest. We began to write, once a week. Not long letters. Not performative apologies. Just small windows into the lives we were each now building. Jerry didn't write. But a photo came. Eliana again. Bigger now. Sitting up, cheeks round, holding a rattle. No caption. Just her, sent from an unrecognized email address. But I knew. A week later, another envelope. This one smaller. A drawing. Crayon on copy paper. Eliana's name scrawled in clumsy letters. A handprint in red beside it. On the back, she started asking for Nana. Thought you should know. No signature. I placed it on the fridge with a magnet. Time passed. I took a ceramics class. Made a friend named Lydia, a retired nurse from Naples who told outrageous stories about patients and ex-husbands with equal delight. We shared lunch on Fridays, alternating between her terrace and mine. I grew basil in a chipped pot. Learned to cook rice properly. Walked further each day. And I wrote. Not to publish. Not for anyone else. But I wrote about what it meant to be needed, and then discarded. To give, and be remembered only as the giving. I wrote about my mother, and how little I knew her. I wrote about the day Donald asked me to marry him, standing in front of a burned-down diner because he'd lost the ring at the beach and didn't want to wait another second. I wrote about becoming someone new at 68. And then one day, on a morning soft with sea air and low light, I received a voice message. Not a text. A voice. Zoe. Hi. I wasn't sure if I should call, but I heard a song today that reminded me of you. That folk album you used to play on Sundays. I hated it then. Now I miss it. Funny, huh? Anyway. Carter and I are separating. I won't pretend you didn't warn me, in your own way. You were right. I bent myself to fit a shape that didn't love me. And I think I've been doing that for a long time. I don't know who I am without all the people I've tried to please. A friend suggested I travel. Just a little. A break. I remembered you said the door was cracked. A crack's enough to see through, right? I listened to the message twice. Then again. That afternoon, I sent her a list of dates for the guest room. And a note. Pack light. Wear comfortable shoes. We'll walk. I wasn't naive. I didn't expect reconciliation to be smooth. I didn't expect it to be permanent, even. But it was something. A glimmer of effort. A reaching back. A year after I first stepped off the plane, Zoe arrived. She looked older. Not in a bad way. Just more real. Like someone who'd finally peeled off a mask and found her skin again. We hugged, stiff at first, then tighter. She stayed for 10 days. We didn't rehash everything. We didn't need to. Instead, we cooked. Walked. Sat in silence. She read the journal I kept on the desk. Asked if she could copy a few pages. One night, we stood on the terrace watching the sun bleed into the horizon. She said, "I used to think you were fragile. I used to be." She looked at me. "But you're not anymore." "No," I said. "I'm not." She nodded. "I think I'm ready to stop being angry at you," she whispered. "Then we'll start from there." Zoe left on a Thursday. Her suitcase was lighter than when she arrived. Not because she'd discarded much, but because she'd let go of something heavier than clothes. We didn't say as much. But I saw it in the way she stood taller, spoke slower, looked me in the eye when she said goodbye. "All right," she promised. "I won't wait for it," I replied. She smiled. She understood that wasn't cruelty, it was permission. To be in each other's lives honestly, not out of guilt. After she left, the apartment felt quieter, but not empty. Her presence hadn't overwhelmed the space like I feared. She'd fit herself in respectfully, thoughtfully. She'd offered to cook, cleaned without being asked questions without expectation of praise. There was a care in her I hadn't seen since she was a child. 2 days later, I found a note tucked into the back of the photo album she'd sent me months earlier. "Mom. I didn't know how to say this in person. Maybe I still don't. But I want to try. When I was growing up, I thought you were the softest person in the world. You gave, and it made me feel safe. But I think I confused soft with small. I thought you stayed small for us, stayed in the background, stayed home, stayed quiet, because that's who you were. Now I realize you stayed quiet because none of us ever asked what you wanted. You were never small. We just didn't see you fully. I don't expect you to forget how I treated you. But I'm starting to understand why you left. And I'm glad you did. Because I wouldn't have met this version of you if you hadn't. Love. Zoe." I folded the note and placed it inside the journal where I kept the entries about my children. It sat now between 2 others, the day she was born, and the day she stopped speaking to me after the engagement dinner. The 3 pages made a kind of arc. An unspoken, imperfect reconciliation. Fall arrived. The air cooled. The markets filled with figs and chestnuts. My routine remained, but something inside it had loosened. I began volunteering twice a week at a small library tucked behind a square no tourist ever found. Mostly shelving books, sometimes helping children with their reading. It wasn't heroic work. It didn't need to be. One Thursday, a girl no older than 7 asked me how to spell miracle. I wrote it out slowly on the corner of her worksheet. She looked at the word, then at me. "Do you believe in them?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes. But not the big ones. Just the little ones," she said. "Yes," I answered. "Especially the ones that take a long time." 3 months later, I received a letter from Jerry. Not an email. Not a photo or a message forwarded through Zoe. It was handwritten, though uneven, as if he'd begun several times and finally forced himself through. "Mom. Rebecca and I are separating. I won't get into details, because they're probably the ones you already suspect. But you should know it wasn't just her. I wasn't present. I wasn't honest. I wasn't half the man I pretended to be. I let fatherhood become a script I was reciting instead of a life I was living. Eliana is with her mother for now. We have an arrangement. She's safe. Happy. But I see her less than I want to. And I miss her more than I knew I could. Sometimes I sit in my apartment and think about how you used to fold towels. You had this way of pressing the corners perfectly, stacking them so they looked like hotel linens. I remember thinking it was unnecessary. Overkill. But now I get it. It wasn't about the towels. It was about having one thing in the house that made sense. I'd like to visit. I won't bring chaos. Just myself. If that's still welcome. Jerry. I read it twice. Then again, aloud. His voice still lived in my ear, deep and boyish, always rushing toward what he wanted without watching who he stepped over. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I wrote 2 new pages in my journal. One about the first time he asked me for help as an adult. One about the night I heard him crying behind a locked bathroom door at 16, after his first heartbreak, when he thought silence was stronger than vulnerability. A week later, I mailed a letter. Jerry. If you come, come as you are. Not as a penitent. Not as a broken man trying to earn something. Just come. I can't promise absolution. But I can offer coffee, and questions, and silence when it's needed. And I'll teach you how to fold towels properly. Love. Mom. He arrived in late November. The first rainstorm of the season had blown in the day before, and the streets smelled of wet stone and fallen leaves. He was thinner. Not in a sick way, just in a way that said something had burned off him. Some layer of pride or posture. His hug was tentative. His eyes didn't roam the room like they used to, searching for approval. We talked. We walked. We argued once, gently. He cooked twice, poorly. And on the 4th day, while I was weeding the window boxes, I heard him singing to himself in the kitchen. Not loudly. Not for performance. Just a man humming to his memory. He stayed for 2 weeks. He didn't ask for money. He did the dishes every night. On the last day, he handed me a photograph. Eliana again. Standing now. Hair wild. Smiling like she knew something. I think she gets it from you, he said. I held the photo gently. I hope so. I told her about Spain, he added. Told her she has a brave grandmother who lives by the sea. I looked up at him. Do I? He laughed. Yes. You do. He left with an easy promise to return. Not a vow. Not a script. Just a goodbye that didn't sound like an end. I spent the winter writing. Not a memoir. Not fiction. Just pages and pages of everything I'd once saved for later. Thoughts that never had time before. Questions I'd never let myself ask. Recipes. Dreams. Memories. Letters to the dead. Letters to myself. I sent a few to Elaine. One, I sent to Zoe. It read. You don't have to become a different woman to deserve peace. You just have to stop giving it away to people who only want it on their terms. She replied 2 days later with a photo of her in a new apartment, small, tidy, full of bookshelves. A caption, my terms now. Sometimes people ask if I regret the way I left. I don't. What I regret is how long it took me to believe I could. That freedom would not destroy the bonds worth keeping, but would expose which ones weren't built to last. I am no longer the mother who waits at the window. Who smiles when disappointed? Who folds herself in silence to preserve the illusion of harmony? Now, I sit on the terrace and watch the sea move toward the land like it belongs there. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I write their names into the pages, not to summon them, but to remember that love, like grief, changes shape when left alone. And I let it be enough. Spring in Valencia brings with it the smell of orange blossoms, so sharp and clean it feels like it scrubs your lungs from the inside. I opened every window in the apartment that morning, even the one in the bedroom that always stuck in its frame. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, holding a warm mug of tea, and let the air drift through, carrying the scent of something living. It was April. A year and a half since I'd left. The streets outside were louder than usual. A festival I'd forgotten the name of, parades of schoolchildren in traditional dress, ribbons tied around wrists and waists, drums echoing off stone. I watched them from my terrace for a while, leaning on the rail, letting the noise roll over me. When I turned back inside, there was a message waiting on my phone. From Rebecca. It was brief. Surprising. I hadn't expected to hear from her directly. Hello, Sandra. I hope this isn't intrusive. I found your email through Jerry's contacts. Eliana has been asking about you more lately. Would you consider visiting, or perhaps a video call? She has questions I don't quite know how to answer. I read it twice, then again, fingers curled loosely around the edge of the counter. My first instinct was hesitation. Not anger, just the usual quiet skepticism that rises when something long closed begins to stir again. I set the phone down. Poured more tea. Sat with the request. Eliana was nearly 3 now. I'd seen photos, her birthday, a Christmas snapshot, a picture of her squinting into snow. But I'd never heard her voice. I didn't know what her laugh sounded like. Whether she had Jerry's eyes or mine. Whether she would say my name like a fact or a question. I didn't want to enter her life as an event. I wanted to arrive like something steady. Something she could reach for without it disappearing. I wrote back that afternoon. Dear Rebecca. Thank you for reaching out. I'd be glad to speak with Eliana. Please let me know a good time, and whether mornings or evenings work best. I don't expect her to know me, but I'd like to begin as someone she can recognize when she's ready. Warmly. Sandra. We arranged the call for a Sunday evening. When her face appeared on the screen, round, serious, with a fringe of curls falling over one eye, I didn't smile right away. I waited. Eliana, Rebecca said softly, this is Nana. She looked at me, silent, examining. Not shy. Just cautious. I waved, slow and small. Hello, sweetheart. She tilted her head. You don't look like a Nana. I laughed. That's fair. You don't have gray hair. Oh, it's gray, I said. I just hide it well. She smiled. Just slightly. Rebecca stepped out of the frame, giving us space. I could hear her moving in the kitchen. We talked, if you can call it that. She showed me a drawing. A new pair of shoes. A toy elephant with a missing ear. I told her about my basil plant. My balcony. The bakery down the street that gives me the crusty ends of bread for free. She told me she liked bread. But only with butter. Me too, I said. It's the best part. The call lasted 20 minutes. I didn't try to make it magical. I didn't tell her I loved her. Not yet. That would come later, when it could be met with something real. When we hung up, I sat quietly for a while. It didn't feel like a beginning or an ending. Just a moment. And for now, that was enough. That summer, Jerry visited again. Alone this time, but different. He brought a book I'd mentioned once, tucked in his suitcase like a peace offering. We sat on the terrace the second night and talked about his job, how it felt empty now, how he wasn't sure what he was working toward. He asked if I ever felt like my life had been wasted, all those years raising kids who ended up treating me like an extra. No, I said. But I wish I'd spoken up sooner. He nodded. I think about that. How we treat women like they should be grateful just to be tolerated. You're not wrong, I said. He didn't apologize. Not directly. But the apology was there, in his listening, in the way he offered to make dinner without waiting to be asked. Before he left, we took a picture together. Him holding the phone, both of us squinting in the sun. Later, he sent me a copy, captioned only, "Better late than never." Zoe visited in the fall. She'd changed again. Not softened, but steadied. She spoke more slowly, didn't rush to fill silence with explanations. She told me she was dating someone new. A man named Peter, a widower with a daughter in college. No pressure. Just someone who made her laugh and didn't need her to be anything but herself. We didn't talk about Carter. We didn't talk about the engagement dinner. We didn't need to. Instead, we walked through the city. Ate late dinners. Sat on benches and fed pigeons. She asked me questions about my childhood. My favorite books. What my mother was like before illness claimed her memory. At the end of her visit, she handed me a small wrapped parcel. Inside was a silver bracelet. Nothing elaborate. Just a single charm, a compass. I thought it might remind you that you chose your direction, she said. I didn't forget, I replied. She smiled. But sometimes it's nice to wear proof. By the second winter, I no longer felt like a woman who had left something behind. I felt like a woman who had stepped fully into something that was always waiting. My routines became habits. The woman at the bakery saved me the crusty ends. The librarian began leaving books she thought I'd like in a small stack behind the desk. Lydia's niece asked me to speak at a small women's circle, a gathering of retired women sharing their stories. At first, I refused. Then one day, I changed my mind. I wrote out a short speech, but didn't read it. Instead, I told them the truth. That you can give everything to the people you love and still be left behind. That boundaries are not cruelty. That silence is not peace. And that starting over doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be as small as saying no to a phone call. As simple as walking into a lawyer's office. As quiet as buying a one-way ticket and folding your towel differently in a new country. They listened. And afterward, one woman touched my hand and said, "I think I can do it too." I said, "Then you already have." Spring came again. The orange blossoms returned. So did Eliana, this time in person. Rebecca had brought her to Spain for a short holiday. We met in a park near the sea. Eliana ran ahead, then circled back to show me a shell she'd found. "I'm collecting," she said. "For a box." I crouched beside her. "Can I add one?" She nodded. We walked together for an hour. Rebecca gave us space, watching from a distance. Eliana held my hand without asking. I didn't cry. Later, she drew me a picture. Me, with a hat. Her, with very long arms. "Because I like hugs," she said. I folded the drawing and tucked it into my journal. That night, I sat on the terrace alone. Donald's photo was beside me. The basil plant now blooming with tiny white flowers. I lit a small candle. Not for ceremony. Just for warmth. And I whispered, "We're all right, you and I. We made it. Because we had. Not back to the past. Not to some perfect family reunion. But forward. Through the ache. Into something quieter, stronger. Mine. Ours. Enough.